Welcome to the Sober Podcast. I am your host, Jamie Brickhouse, and I am thrilled about today's Sober-lebrity guest, John Freyer. And by the way, folks, Sober-lebrity has just been trademarked, so don't use it without talking to us. John is an associate professor of cross-disciplinary media in the Department of Photography Film at Virginia Commonwealth University. His projects, which are many and amazing, have been featured in The New Yorker and NBC's Today Show, and include All My Life for Sale, Big Boy, Live, IKEA, and the Social Works projects, Free Ice Water and Free Hot Coffee, which he has brought to the TEDx stage. And I would like to say that I have been a beneficiary of John's coffee largesse and giving back. John and I know each other from a Zoom sober meeting, and on my anniversary, he asked me to send me his address, and I got some free amazing dark roast coffee. And it's part of what John does in his sobriety and giving back. And I know that was a long, long introduction. Thank you, John, for being here.
Jamie, thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor.
Well, it's great to have you on the show. And your art engages accidental audiences. Can you tell our listeners about what that means and how it works?
Sure. What that means is, so my art practice over the last 10 years has interfaced essentially with my experience in recovery. So the way they talk about the work I do is they call it social practice. So it's work that really depends on people engaging and interacting with it in places that you don't necessarily find art. So I'm really interested in
where?
The project All My Life for Sale, for example, I sold everything I owned on the internet auction site eBay, and then traveled around the country visiting people who bought my stuff.
Oh, I love it.
There were certainly people who bought stuff from me who knew that I was an artist doing this project and bought objects because they had some sort of artistic value. But then there were other people that just bought a toaster. And to me, I'm really interested in the person that bought the toaster versus I'm interested in anyone who's interested in the thing, but having an accidental audience. A project called Free Ice Water was the first project I did in sobriety, and that involved these big ice water containers that I put out in the street and would talk to people. It was early sobriety. So if you remember early sobriety, you talked to a lot of people, told them that you should drink water and all of these things. I like to make projects that people can engage with and interact with, and whether or not it's considered art to the person that steps up to the coffee bike or the Narcan bike or the free ice water stand doesn't matter to me.
Yeah. And what we're talking about, what I wanted to focus on your story and your art is how your art aligns with your recovery and how it's also a way of giving back. And, of course, many of us know that they say in recovery, the key to sobriety or recovery is that you have to give back what was given to you. So let's all keep that in mind as we continue the conversation. So, and I don't want to get into some of the various projects, but by the way, I also want to tell our listeners that they should take a look at your TEDx talks. The free ice water talk is amazing, and it's I think what you're doing there is incredible about having this conversation with someone over a free jar of ice water and preserving that conversation.
Yeah, we're actually I'm going to be doing that with Leslie Jameson in New York in September.
Oh, fabulous. Leslie Jameson, the writer, who's another co-sober friend of ours. Did your career and path within the art industry start before you got sober or after?
Oh, well before I got sober.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you mentioned All My Life for Sale, that was a project that I did as part of my master's project. So it was a project that was turned into a book, and that was 10 years before I got sober, for sure.
Yeah.
So my art practice changed significantly. And in some ways I look back and I think that, like, I went from really thinking about commerce and literally selling everything to laser etching the word free onto all of the bike projects that I build. So, there's been a transition in terms of the way that I think about the work that I make, and also the process of ways that people can engage with it. Yeah,
So,
I mean,
so it changed in in fact, that idea of giving back.
Sure,
And
sure.
after you got sober and not.
And that's changed over time. So when you were talking about the Free Ice Water project, that was a project that came about in early sobriety. And for me, it was really about something that I learned in recovery. Was I learned to listen. I learned to shut my mouth and sit in a meeting and listen to what other people had to say. And that was one of the things that when we've done the project in different formats, the whole goal of Free Ice Water is to have two people sit across from each other and share a conversation over a mason jar of water. And the prompt is to think about a turning point in their life. So with people in sobriety, I can point to May 21st, 2013 as a turning point in my life, but we all have these different turning points, from a book we read, or a teacher, or somebody that impacted us and we went left instead of right, and that it eventually brought us to be sitting where we are. So that project was a project that started in early sobriety, and it came from like the learning that I was doing and wanting to share what I was learning outside of the rooms of recovery. But the second project that came out of that was the Free Hot Coffee Bike, and that is something that is a few years later.
Yeah. And how does that work? The Free Hot Coffee Bike.
Yeah, the Free Hot Coffee Bike is a bike that it folds out. It's a big tricycle bicycle. It folds out. There are blue camp cups, those metal camp cups that you can't take away. We make pour-over cups of recovery roast coffee. It takes 3 to 5 minutes to make a cup of pour-over coffee.
Right.
And then when you get your coffee, you have to stay there because you can't take the cups away. And the bike itself is operated by people who are in recovery or allies of recovery. And that allows people, family members and people that are supportive of people in recovery, to be involved. It also allows people who are in recovery to not have to identify as in recovery when they're out doing outreach on the bike. But really, Jamie, the coffee project really came from a very selfish place, because I don't know if you've ever been to a recovery meeting in a church basement, but usually the coffee
Bad coffee
is terrible. And in my experience, I thought in early sobriety that I could fix that problem. So I volunteered to make the coffee, and I went to wherever and got dark roast coffee that I liked. This is like 2 weeks sober. I'm going to do coffee for you.
And you're going to change everything you don't like.
You're going to everything and make it better.
And the chairs are arranged wrong, and we're going to
whatever it was. I certainly went to fix that. And let me tell you, the old timers in that they were like, "Who the fuck made this coffee?" So again, like recovery for me is something that's ever changing and evolving. So Ice Water was a project that was specific to a time and really worked in early recovery. But as I got some stability there, I started to think about ways that I could give back. So the coffee bike is an example of that, right? And the way the coffee is generated. So I think we've done 13 editions of Recovery Roast, which means we go to a local recovery community, and then we find a local coffee roaster. And then we have a group of people taste a bunch of different coffees from that roaster, and that creates a custom blend. So we just did that in September at the Portland, the Alano Club of Portland. So they're working with this great coffee roaster called Push Pull. And now they have a custom edition of Recovery Roast. And
So
I
you
have
partner with them, and they do it for free because it's
yeah, they do it for
well,
free, or basically people become a wholesale client of
yeah.
a roaster and get really good coffee at a fair price, and it's coffee where the flavor profile is generated by that community, right? So when I went to that initial meeting and brought whatever coffee I liked, that wasn't, people didn't like it. But when you invite a community in to taste a bunch of different coffees and then they determine what they like, that coffee is like a really popular coffee in various meetings. So in many ways,
true flavor of recovery in that community.
in some ways I'm giving back, but on the other hand, I'm also changing meeting coffee one meeting at a time.
I like that crusade.
Yes,
An important one. Yeah, I've tried to change the coffee from time to time, but
you got to be careful.
I did inject baked cheese grits at one meeting when I was a hospitality chair, and they were appreciated. I will say this. So, how long have you been in recovery?
So I just celebrated 10 years on May 21st.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I'm gonna have to send you something. I'll figure it out later.
You send me a link to this podcast.
And without getting into a full qualification, what brought you to recovery?
Yeah, I mean, what brought me to recovery was that my life had become unmanageable. I live in Richmond, Virginia, and this is where I got sober. I moved here in essentially January of 2013, and by May of 2013, I had enough consequences and things happening in my life that recovery seemed to be, or at least walking into a recovery meeting seemed to be my only option. So I lived in a college town before I came to Richmond. I lived in Iowa City. It's a great town, and unbeknownst to me, really, I had, in hindsight, I had built my life around drinking.
Yeah.
I lived a few blocks from my favorite bars and restaurants. I lived a few blocks from an emergency room.
Smart.
I could walk to work. My schedule started at 11. I mean, all of the things. I never kind of pieced it together, but I always had a reason to be at a bar. There was the writer's workshop on Wednesday. There was the painting workshop on Thursday. The photo workshop was on Tuesday. Football Friday, whatever it was. I always had a reason and a social obligation to be drinking the way that I like to drink with the people I like to drink with. And I had a rude awakening when I moved to Richmond and knew nobody and didn't have a job until September. So if you find yourself in bars by yourself every day with no reason,
chances are
there might be something else. I also come from a household that has alcoholism, and my brother's been in recovery for 20 years, and my mother died of this disease. So it was certainly not something that would be foreign to me. But like the frog in the pot, it wasn't until I moved to Richmond that I really kind of understood the way that I was using the patterns of use that really were not healthy for me.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've been talking about how your art changed after you got recovery, the different projects you've been doing. What has art done for your personal recovery?
Well, for me, I mean, so I'm an artist, right? So I have to make, and I have to use my art as a way to think about the world. So, I think for me, it was this pivot away from thinking about me all the time to thinking about the world in which I was working and living and interacting with. So even the when you think of the free ice water, like to me, what I was doing with that was I was taking the thing that I had learned and I was expanding it so that other people could benefit from the things that we learn in recovery, which
Yeah.
is spend an hour talking to somebody and you listen to them, like good things happen, right? Depending on who you're talking to.
Yes.
Yeah, and then service becomes part of what recovery is. So how do I use my art practice in service of other people? So in lots of ways, my practice has gone. So with the ice water project, the at the end of the conversation, people drink. This is pre-COVID. Would drink from this blue mason jar and then put a token of that conversation in the jar.
Yeah.
Refill it, sign and seal it, and then sign it. So, like at the end of that project, there was this blue mason jar or a set of blue mason jars. So there was an exhibition that I had in New York where there was a wall with a bunch of shelves filled with these mason jars, each one like an hour-long conversation. And so, that is about the expanding that conversation, but it's also about making that thing. And as I move through my projects, there's less and less objects involved. So, the coffee project, there's nothing that comes out of that except for people having coffee. There might be this object that's this beautiful cedar box bicycle that's laser etched, but it's not something that you can't put it in a gallery per se.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the project after free hot coffee was called Free Hot Supper, which we're also going to be doing in September, and that's basically a community dinner where we when I've done things like as an artist in residence, I'll do an event with free ice water. I'll go to a bunch of different recovery meetings with the Free Hot Coffee Bike and invite people. And then anybody I interact with, I give a wooden token that has the date and time of a dinner. And then the end of my engagement, wherever it is, there's this dinner. And I've been partnering with this group that supports people in the food and beverage industry in recovery called Ben's Friends. So
Okay.
the last meal that we hosted, they put together this meal and it was served by people in the restaurant industry that were in recovery to a bunch of people that got these wooden tokens. And some people were people in recovery. Some people were people that were on the street that somebody said, oh, here, have a token, because the way to know about the event is that it's laser etched on a little wooden token.
Yeah, that's great. So you're giving back and it's fellowship. We're going to take a quick commercial break. Stick with us and we'll be back in a few seconds.
Hi, I'm Sonia, the founder of Everbloom. We help you change your relationship with alcohol through connection and conversation. We provide small group meetings where you can share your story and get the encouragement and support you need to achieve your goals. Whatever your goals are, we're a judgment-free space. You can find us at joineverbloom.com, BLUME, and try us out with a free meeting.
And we're back talking to John Freyer. Tell us about another one of those projects, Free Narcan Bike.
Yeah, so the Free Narcan Bike was something that, we're in the middle of an overdose crisis, right? So I'm sure you have friends, and I certainly have friends and people that I know that have left us because they've overdosed on things related to fentanyl and so on and so forth. And one of the things that I started doing we started doing Narcan training at the VCU campuses where I teach. So we would do these Revive Narcan training systems. People would come in. It would be a 20-minute session, and people would leave with Narcan. And I ended up when we were training Narcan, like on the college campus at a table, some people would stop by and some people would not. Like if you've ever gone through people tabling somewhere, you'd be like, I don't think I want to meet those people. But when we paired it with the coffee bike and people stopped for coffee,
Yeah.
then they would get trained. So we decided to build this Narcan bike, and the whole purpose of that bike. So the free hot coffee bike is this big tricycle. It's hard to get around. You definitely don't want to be going up and down the hills of Richmond. The free Narcan bike is a pedal assist electric bike. It's very sleek. It's loaded with 42 boxes of Narcan and an inflatable CPR dummy that we call Manny Fresh. And we basically go out into the community, put the kickstand down, and then train groups of people. So we train them on how to recognize an overdose and then to use Narcan to revive someone if they're in overdose. So we do the training and the distribution of that. So I had to become a member of the Richmond City Medical Reserve so that I could distribute. And actually, the bike now has been recognized by the Virginia Department of Health as a harm reduction partner. So again, like I've gone from like an art practice that has some things connected to it to really like this almost social service oriented part where the art piece is so much is basically the design of the bike, right? Where the service becomes way more important than
the art.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have do you how long has the Narcan bike been happening?
So we initially launched it in February, perfect timing, February of 2020. So we did some distribution, and then we did some online distribution, but we've trained thousands of people.
Wow.
Trained.
And do you have any stories of lives that were saved or people who implemented that training or whose lives were saved because of it?
I don't have data like but I do know. So we're the Richmond City Medical Reserve. When they were training me to train people, we trained in the Central Public Library. We trained all the librarians. And the librarians were a little hesitant, saying, well, this is not something that we're going to need. And one of those librarians saved someone's life the following day.
Amazing.
So having naloxone,
that's the kind of story I'm looking for. Yeah.
Yes. And you don't know. Like people don't know when you're going to encounter someone in overdose. So if you go to a Starbucks, if you're walking in the streets of New York, and people who are susceptible to overdose is everybody. You can overdose if you have an elderly parent who takes an oxycodone and then accidentally takes it again a half hour later, and suddenly they're in overdose. So, we're in a pretty interesting time where the Narcan is about to be over the counter, which will help with the distribution of that drug to as many places as possible, and it removes the requirement that it be a prescription. So, when I distribute Narcan, I have to write the prescriber's name on the bottom of the box and who receives it. And in the future, we won't have to do that.
Right. Amazing project. Have you always known you were an artist and wanted to be an artist, and that was always your path?
My father was an attorney and my mother was an artist. Mm-hmm. I studied in college. I studied political science and I studied art. But as soon as, my first real job in after school was I worked for an art nonprofit in Syracuse, New York, called Lightwork. Yeah. Which is a photography organization. So I've always been connected to photography. It was my first kind of love and practice. And I teach in the Department of Photography and Film. So that's what my MFA is in. And that's an expertise that I have. It's not something that I use in my practice apart from documentation of the things that I do and teaching.
Right. What's the hardest thing you've been through since you've been in recovery, and how did you get through it?
both of my parents died within 6 months of each other.
Mm.
So my father died in February of 2016, and then my mother died shortly thereafter. And they've been long divorced.
That was my next question.
Yeah, so they'd been long divorced, so there was no kind of parallel in that. But one of the gifts of recovery, right? So I was the person that led the prayer at my father's burial.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And in the days before I was in recovery, spirituality was not a part of anything that I would do.
Yeah.
If I'd been asked to lead the prayer, I would have told them to fuck off. And they wouldn't have asked me. So to be asked and to be humble enough to say the words that were necessary for the people in that, standing around that grave to have comfort, certainly is a gift that recovery has given me.
Yeah, that's a pretty amazing gift of the program. And yeah, I went through both my parents' deaths sober, and I'm glad about that. Really.
And I didn't have to drink,
Yeah.
And believe me, at both of those burials and ceremonies, there was plenty of Jamesons going around the Freyer McGrath family clan. But my brother, who's now sober 20 years, and I were steadfast together, linked together in sobriety for that time, and made it through.
It's great. What's the best lesson you've learned in sobriety, and how did it help you?
So one of the things that I've been doing is I've been connected to this group called Rams in Recovery, who's been partnering with me on my projects, and they do direct supports for students that are in recovery.
Mm-hmm. What's it called?
It's called Rams in Recovery. They're part of a movement of colleges and universities that have collegiate recovery programs. So they do direct supports for students that are in recovery on college campuses, which you can imagine is a pretty challenging place.
Yes, I can't imagine getting sober when I was in college.
I know.
And I probably needed to then, but.
Me too. So for me, early sobriety, I got what I needed. And then I was a person that would just pick up blue chips every year at my anniversary. And, I was talking with some of the students that I was, I'm an advisor to this group. And one of the students was like, "Oh, what's your program?" I was like, "Well, I come here and then I do this." And they're like, "That actually sounds like you're not doing anything." And that was 4 years into my recovery, and that conversation led me to plugging into a home group, taking on service positions, and that also corresponded with the shift in direction and the focus of my work. So, I think
which brings it back to giving back.
Yeah, which brings it back to giving back. Like, part of me is I always took myself so seriously, and by stepping away from that and realizing there's so much that I don't know, and there are benefits to me knowing more. I mean, last year I took a course, the training to be a certified peer recovery support specialist. Now, whether or not I'm going to do that as a career, it's unlikely.
Yeah.
But it certainly puts me in a position to know more about the disease of, about recovery and addiction and mental health stuff, so that when I do interface with students and young people in recovery, I can be of more of assistance.
Right. And that's a marvelous way to end our conversation today. Thank you, John. And to all our listeners, thank you for your continued support. Visit us on soberpodcast.com and all places where you find your podcast. Leave us a review, sign up for the mailing list. You will also find the contact info for John Freyer in the show notes. I'm your host, Jamie Brickhouse. You can find me on TikTok, where I tell a true story wearing high heels every day. I'm the author of Dangerous and Wet, and I am signing out from the Sober Podcast. Tune in for another show next week.